Now we're going to take all this information that we just accumulated when we did the last assignment on the construction of a sharp major scale, and we're going to put it into a logical format known as keys and key signatures. This way you don't have to write the accidental in every or on every note that it applies to, but rather it'll be looked after right at the very beginning, right after the clef sign. And that will then apply to everything which follows in the music. Now we talked about the piano keyboard. We talked about enharmonic equivalents, i.e. the notes that have two names for every note. We talked about tones. And with that we were able then to determine the structure of a major scale, which is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. From that, we then discovered that when we wrote all the scales according to the way they showed up on the assignment, it actually formed a structure and a sequence of events that could be followed and predicted after we did about the third or fourth one. We could see what that structure was, and then we didn't have to do tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone anymore, because it was a logical progression all the way through, which I'll review here in a moment. However, you need to understand that in music, when we refer to the first note, second note, third note, we don't use that terminology when it comes to a scale, because the first, second, or third note in a piece that you're reading may not necessarily have anything to do with the note we're referring to in the scale, and I'll explain that. In music, we use what are known as the degrees of the scale, and they are determined by the first note, which is known as the tonic, which is where we derive the name of a scale. So if it's called C major, well then the tonic or first note of the scale is going to be C. If it's called G major, a G major scale, well then it starts on G and ends on G. If it's called a D major scale, then the tonic or first note is going to be called D, and it'll go from D all the way up to D and back down again. So that's what we're referring to when it comes to the degrees of the scale. So in the C major scale, this is the C major scale, and it's important to note that we use Roman numerals, first of all, when we're talking about the degrees of the scale. This is the first degree, second degree, third degree, or third note, fourth note, fifth note, sixth note, and seventh note of the C major scale. The eighth note, of course, will be the same as the first. That's what we start on, we end on. That's what a scale does. Now, in music, we don't call them the first, second, third, or fourth note. The universal language that is used by all musicians when it comes to identifying the degrees of the scale are these terms that you're about to hear. The first note of any scale is known as the tonic. Okay, that is the very first note of the scale. If it's called G major, then the tonic is G. If it's called A major, then the tonic is A. All right, and that's the way that works. The second one is known as the supertonic, which is one word, by the way. It's a compound word. Supertonic. Super means above, so it's logical. This is the supertonic. Above the tonic is what we're referring to. The mediant is the third degree of the scale. Make sure you get the spelling correct, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so the mediant, M-E-D-I-A-N-T, ant, okay? Now I'm going to explain that. It in actual fact means the middle. So if you're listening to a piece of music, that middle note is extremely important because it defines the tonality of the piece you're playing. And that tonality can be one of two things. It can be either major or minor. The light side of music or the dark side. Well, the middle note is this note. And in a chord, all you have to do is change that middle note to, all I did was change one note. That was the middle note, the mediant. And it will change it to minor or determine it as major, one or the other, just by that middle note. Okay? Major is the light side of music. Okay, you can have a beautiful day, and then all of a sudden there's a storm. All I've done is I've changed one note, okay, which is the middle note. It determines the tonality. It's called the middle note or mediant. This next one is called the subdominant. Now we'll come back to that in a minute. The next note, 5, the fifth note of any scale, is known as the dominant. It is the dominant chord that points always to the tonic. So that you can always have that, it always points to that tonic. Okay? And again. Or, quite simply, it always points to the tonic. It's the dominant chord that does that. And that's 5. Now, let's go back. We already talked about this once, but the 8th note of any scale is also going to be the tonic. Because whatever note we start on, we have to end on as well. The first note's going to be tonic, and the 8th note is going to be the tonic. Starts all over again. So therefore, subdominant, sub meaning under, submarine, underwater. Subdominant means under. What does dominant mean? Dominant means 5. So it means under 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's where it gets the number. Subdominant is the 4th degree of the scale because it's 5 under the tonic. Dominant is 5. And therefore, you should be able to then conclude that submediant means under 3. Mediant is 3, so under 3. 1, 2, 3. Submediant is the 6th degree. And then finally, the 7th is known as the leading note because it leads to the tonic. If you don't believe me, listen to this. And it leads to every time. And you have to hear the tonic. Otherwise, it'll drive a musician nuts. So there you go. Those are the degrees of the scale, and you have to memorize these degrees of the scale. Okay? So the degrees are: 1 is the tonic, 2 is the supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, leading note, and tonic. Those are the degrees of the scale.